Hello everyone, welcome today to Exploring New Materials for Props Making. My name is Eric Barnes, I'm a props master here in St. Louis. And today we're going to be talking about some things that I use when I'm making props for my different productions. This class is broken up into 3 different sections. The first section we'll be talking about things that we can use to make items, either by sculpting or by crafting or by creating or by casting. The second thing we'll be talking about today are different materials that you can use to coat or to treat or to paint those items to kind of give a finished surface or a universal look to the item you're creating. And the third thing we're talking about today are paper props and resources available to you for them. There also is a website built up for this class. It's a Google site. Its link is here on the screen. And that's a resource available to you for all the things we're going to be talking about in this class, as well as sort of the links of things. Items being showed today are all things that are available at local craft or art supply stores. So they should be fairly accessible to everyone across the country. And I hope you enjoy the class. So in this class today, we're going to mostly focus on some different materials you can use to either sculpt or to mold or to create different either items themselves or things you can apply to other items to give you the look of the prop you're after. So the first material we're going to focus on today is a product class of things called friendly plastics. And what friendly plastics are they're these little, mostly you'll find them in white pellets. They do also have sheets and other pieces besides the pellets, but pellets are the most easy to use. So I have this bowl here and I'm just going to pour some slightly under boiling water. And now as the hot water is kind of going through, the beads start becoming clear from the outside in. And you can see that our beads that started off the opaque white are now sort of a clearish color. And once they're all the way clear through, that means that you can start working with it and start kneading it. And this basically gives you a plastic putty then that you can use, to either mold things or to apply techniques. So I'm just going to press this into our silicone mold. And you can kind of see the texture it's able to capture. This is one that I've done and let cool. And you can either plastic prime these and then paint them, or the other thing that you can do is you can use pigments that they especially make for them that allow you to color the plastic itself. And now, in addition to the plastic pellets I'm putting in, I'm also going to put in a couple of these pigment colors. In this case, I'm going to go for some gold. And again, now as I'm kneading my plastic, that color is being dispersed throughout. And if you find you've pulled it out too early and you haven't gotten all the pellets melted in the center, you can go ahead and just pour some more hot water in and let it kind of keep going. The other big thing that I like about this product is it's one of the few products that I use that are actually reusable. So if I mold something that I don't like, I can chop it back up into little pieces and remelt it. Now, obviously, if it's one of the ones that has pigment colors in it, it will stay that pigment color. But effectively, it can be reused as many times as I can melt it down. And again, I'm just pressing this into this mold just to kind of give you a sense of the surface capture. This is really great for things like wax seals or like little coins, things like that, because it's real easy to work with. The other thing that I use it for a lot is making joints of things. So this is a little ball and socket joint I made just by forming 2 parts, and it allows, because it's a plastic surface on both sides, there's not much friction between those 2 products. The next 2 products we're going to talk about today are 2 things you can find at basically any art craft supply store. They are Super Sculpey clay and paper clay. Super Sculpey clay is very stiff, it's very good for carving things, and it's very good for molding things because it has a really great surface capture ability. And it is an oven baked clay. And the advantage of an oven baked clay is that it gives you as much working time as you want. There is no there's no limits on how long you can work on the item. And that's really good for doing things like fine detailed sculpting or working on things where you need that time to go back and forth to it until you get to the point where you're ready to fire it. And then once you've fired it in the oven, you have a super hard positive cast. Now, the one thing you do have to worry about a little bit with Super Sculpey is that you do have to be careful because it can burn in your oven. So if you're trying to keep it the same sort of like either flesh colored or sort of light beige colored, you have to be very watchful of it so that it doesn't sort of burn. But it's also really great at taking paint. So this is a Super Sculpey one I made, and then using Design Master spray paint, I was able to spray it with the green and then the bronze overspray to kind of give it that vintage jewelry piece look. The other product that we're going to talk about in this section is paper clay. Paper clay is an air dry clay. So unlike our Sculpey, you basically have only as long as it takes for it to dry. And that is both good and bad because obviously if you're trying to use it for a big project, you have to be very careful of how much time you take on things. But the advantage is that you don't have to bake it and it's ready to go as soon as it's dry. It's really especially good at capturing detail on things. You can see this is the coin version of this one. But the thing that I use it for most is using one of these fondant molds to make the decoration for cakes and things. The one thing you do be careful of is that it does not have a lot of internal structure. So if you're trying to do things like fine designs or like beads like this, you want to be very careful and make sure you really take account of what you're attaching it to because it will break off of itself fairly easily. The other advantage is that it's a fair bit lighter than our Sculpey. The next thing I use a lot to sculpt with and to use for my crafting projects for props is formable foam. It is also an air dry product. It has a really interesting texture to it. It's very sticky when you get started with, and you kind of have to almost snap it off, pieces of it. Now this of course is the black one. They also do have other colors of it. I like to make sure I always wear gloves with it because it is just kind of a sticky product. And it's super, super lightweight. The one thing I will caution you on, the paper clay, you do have to be a little bit careful because it's an air dry, it will shrink slightly. This stuff will shrink fairly considerably. You want to be very careful when you're molding things, especially that they will line up once they finish drying. The other thing to keep consideration of too is because it's very soft product, if you allow it to dry outside of its mold, all of your detail kind of gets lost. But if you let things dry in the mold, you're able to capture really great detail on things. And it's super lightweight. This is really great. This is what I use to make a lot of like either uniform badges or insignias or things. This was a prototype for one we just did for a show I did at school, where I brushed a little bit of a metallic powder into a mold. And then I was able to create a super lightweight lion head to put onto the king and queen sash. And the final sort of category of clay that I want to talk about today is what are called epoxy putties. And epoxy putties are a two-part product that when coming in contact with each other, start a chemical reaction, so they chemically harden. And so these are some of the fastest to set up, but because it is a chemical reaction, that time period is what it is. There is no way to slow it down, there's no way to stop it. So if whatever you're trying to sculpt or cast isn't finished by the time that it starts to set, there's no going back to saving it. And it looks like sort of two different putties around each other. So there's like an outer darker color on the outside and then a different color on the center. And what you'll do is you'll chop that off and then mix it together until those two colors become homogeneous. And then once that happens, that's when your chemical clock starts. This is really good also to have in your kit for like repairing things because it does set up super fast if you do need to try and fix something that broke off stage or got somehow damaged in some way. It's a really fast way of trying to fix those sorts of things. There's also a special version of this that's made by Smooth On, and it's called Freeform Air. It also is an epoxy clay, but a lot lighter. To give you a sense of that, these are both 20-gram portions. So this one here is 20 grams of that first tube I showed you of epoxy putty, and this is also 20 grams of this Freeform Air. And it's really great for doing things like rapid prototyping of things. So if I need to make a bunch of cookies that I'm then gonna paint weird colors, I can use a cookie mold and press that in there. And the other thing that it's really great for is making stone items. So by embedding either actual stone powder or gravel or other like pigments and dyes, you can make things look like stone really easily. And it also has, I think, the best capture of all of our materials today. So it's really great if you're trying to get something at a very high relief. Now, because this is an epoxy product, this is one that you really want to use in a mold. I have used it as a putty basically to kind of make tree bark and stuff by carving into it, but you have to be very careful because anything that is not silicone, it will stick to. So to kind of give you a sense of how these products weigh in relationship to each other, I've weighed out 20 grams of each product. Another product I use a lot, especially if I'm making things like stabs or things that need to have a surface treatment that's bendable, is I use hot glue a lot in the molds. You can do it either by just sort of carefully squeezing in, or if you get to the point of using this a lot, they do have what are called hot glue pots, where you can kind of pour it in. And by using it in these silicone molds, it's able to capture a fair bit of detail. But what's best about it is that it has an innate flexibility that none of our other products have. So you can imagine if I'm needing to make a scepter for a queen or a king or something, obviously I can't, make a trim like this with any of our other products without spending a lot of time, but this, by using hot glue itself, I'm able to get a really good sort of flexible surface. And again, because it is hot glue, I can then just put once it's cooled down, I can then just put a small bead on the back side of it, and it will literally bond to whatever the surface is. And it takes paint fairly well too. So this is just some hot glue molds that I've done with a spray paint. A really easy way of making, generally metalish looking surfaces. It's not the greatest, I will say, for detail casting, because it is very easy for it to get little air bubbles in it and such. But again, depending on what you're using it for, it is a very easy material to kind of bend over things and then just paint right over. So it may be useful to you. I use it a lot for like decorating the spines of books and stuff like that. Things where you're not going to be looking at them super up close, and I need to do like a big swath of design kind of quickly. It works really well for that kind of stuff. Because again, it gives me a really cheap and easy way of doing a lot of texture that's pretty easily paintable without very much effort. The last material we're going to talk about today in terms of things that you can make stuff specifically out of are liquid plastics. Liquid plastics are something that I use a lot in my work because they're very easily reproducible. So if I need to make something for an opera or for a professional company I'm working for and I need to make 35 of something, it's much easier to make a couple of molds and be able to pour a plastic copy into those over the course of a couple of days. The other thing that it's really great for is things that aren't producible in any other way. Some of the things I've made with them before, my high school that I help out with did crucible, and so we needed a bunch of pewter tumblers. And so I cast one of my vintage pewter tumblers, and by brushing the surface of my mold with pewter powder and then casting in the plastic, I was able to make a bunch of plastic pewter looking cups. The other thing I'll do it for a lot is chocolates and different fake food items. So this is a fake chocolate made for a show. And I can make it in a bunch of different colors by just dyeing it with different levels of pigment. And again, this is really handy too, because if I need to, let's say, have some of the chocolates on the plate be edible and some be, or most be fake, I'm able to get two of the exact same chocolate molds, and then by picking a specific shape and only making that shape in the real chocolate and making all the rest in plastic, the actual will know what to grab. So for example, with the assortment you can see on the screen right now, if I made all the square chocolates edible, they would know very clearly what to grab, and it would be very safe that way. The other thing that I use clear plastics for a lot is making fake glass or making fake translucent things, right? There's really no other way to make something like this without a clear plastic to give that sort of translucency. So as I said, the plastics we're going to be playing with today are 2-part liquid plastics. They're by Smooth On. There's a bunch of brands out there. They all work similarly. I personally prefer Smooth On because I find their stuff to be the easiest to work with and the easiest to get started with. You'll have 2 parts, a part A and a part B. They'll come in some sort of container. Smooth Ons are typically done in either pint or gallon containers. Just to save us the time of watching me pour things, I've gone ahead and poured them out into 2 equal-sized little glasses, basically. And some people are always confused when I do this. They are like, well, how come we're not measuring out like 1/4 of a cup or 4 tablespoons to get equal parts? The reason I do it this way is because those measurements are the same thing, right? So half a cup is something we've decided is a certain volume. And so by getting 2 of the exact same container and filling to the same point, I'm actually having a more accurate way of measuring than I were to try and scoop out 3 tablespoons or something. And also, to be very honest, it's just easier to do it this way because these containers are basically have to get thrown away because there's no way to clean this product out. So I don't want to go through a whole bunch of measuring cups when I'm getting the exact same specificity in this manner. So this is Smooth On 300Q. It is the fastest liquid setting plastic they have. I'm using it today so that you guys don't have to watch things cure for as long. Like I said, it is super, super fast, which I kind of find fun to work with. And it's really good for small little things, but they have a bunch of slower setting ones. So if you guys want to get into this at your schools, I'd recommend starting with just the plain 300 or even one of the slower ones. Again, as you think about what plastics you need too, there's sort of 2 big criteria, right? So do you need something that's opaque or do you need something that's clear? That's the first one. And basically, the longer the cure time, the longer you have for the air bubbles to rise out of it. So you'll get a better surface texture, and also if you're working with a clear, you'll have a clearer product. So when you look at a label for these liquid plastics, they'll have 2 things normally labeled on there. The first is what they call the pot life, and the second is what they call the demold time. I'm sure you guys can understand the demold time is the amount of time it takes before you can pull it out of the mold. That's sort of like the finished product, if you will. What the pot life means is that's the amount of time you have to stir it together. So this particular one I'm working with has a 35-second pot life. So I have basically 30 seconds to mix these portions together before it no longer is pourable. So again, this is not what I would recommend starting with, but it's really fun for this demo to kind of show you how fast these opaque plastics can go. I'm also going to be working on what I call the 2-cup mix method. So I'm going to mix together in 1 cup first for about 1/3 of my pot life. And then I'm going to pour it into an entirely new clean cup. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that if I do have any unmixed portions of my product, they don't go onto my mold. Because what could happen then is that then I would maybe not have as a finished casting, or I might have a big air bubble or an unmixed portion, and that would kind of ruin the whole point of doing this. And you can see it's going to go through what's called an exothermic reaction. So those 2 liquids are coming together, and as they come together, they start getting really, really hot. And then instantaneously it will change from being a clear liquid to being an opaque plastic. And you can see it's going now. And anywhere that you can now see that milky white color, that means it's set up. It is now solid there. So this part in the center is basically solid. Now, it is an exothermic reaction, and that's true of both the clear and the opaques. That means it starts at the center and it kind of works its way out. So the very outer extremities are going to be the last things that cure. So if you're doing something like this bird mold, for example, you're going to want to make sure that you wait, even though if the bottom might feel like it's fully firm, you want to wait till the entire end of that demold time, because the very tip of the beak or things that are farther away from that center of mass may not have finished their full chemical reaction yet. But you can see now that effectively, in just that time that we were talking, we now have a finished casting. Now, this is slightly before it's demold time because I wanted to show you that one of the other things that I do with this product a lot is I make sort of medallions that I put either on poles or on walls. And so now while it's still curing, I can bend it over a shape and let it harden that way. And it's a really easy way of getting something that's custom fit to go around like a piece of sonotube or a piece of railing or whatever you might need without having to sculpt something super intricate. As I said, this gets extremely hot, so we are using molds that I've made today, but you can also use any of the high quality chocolate or candy molds. Just do make sure that they're ones that are able to go either oven or candy temperature, because otherwise they may melt on you. So the clears work effectively the same way, except that instead of having what's called a flash cure, which you saw where it goes instantaneously from being that clear liquid to being that opaque white, it goes through what's called a gel cure. So it gets thicker and thicker as that exothermic reaction is happening, and that's what allows it to stay clear. Because basically what we just watched with that white plastic one is a bunch of tiny, tiny air bubbles being trapped in that surface because of the heat being produced. And in that process, it changed that to be an opaque surface. Obviously, if it did that same process, our clear would no longer be clear. So there are two surface treatments that I use a lot in my props work. The first of which is called gold leafing. Originally it was done with real gold, now it's done with basically a imitation brass, or sometimes you can do it in either aluminum for silver or copper sheets. And what it basically is, it's basically the application of a super thin layer of glue called a size, and then you use metal sheets to kind of press into that glue once it's become tacky, and that gives you sort of a metallic look. It's a really great surface technique to use on things that are plastic especially. You can see this is just one of those industrial cheap plastic glasses. And again, if it was coated all the way around, it's a pretty convincing metallic surface. And the other thing I do with a lot is leather. So these are two billfolds that I made for an opera I did. And this one is just the plain leather that's been dyed and coated. And this is the gold leafed version of it. And you can see not only did I gold leaf this case, but I went back through and I sort of patinaed it. So I mixed some clear sealants, some that had sort of like a raw umber color and one that had almost a black color to it. And then by kind of brushing it on, I was able to get a more realistic sort of surface treatment. I also use gold leaf, or in this case imitation leaf, a lot when I'm doing big picture frames. I had to do a big sort of almost 7-foot oval picture frame for an opera, and obviously one, had to fly in, so it couldn't be very heavy, and two, the cost of it would have been enormous if we had actually made it out of wood. So we actually made it out of just thin plywood, and that insulation they use around, like, probably in your house, either like the water heater or maybe the air conditioner has that sort of black, sort of round insulation foam. By slicing that in half and kind of applying it around the curves, we were able to create sort of a realistic frame profile, but for a lot less weight and cost also. The final product I want to talk to you guys about is a whole line of different things, basically, all under the brand Design Master. They are basically super thin spray paints. They're originally designed for using on silk flowers and real flowers. But what they give you is they give you a really fine mist and a really thin coat. So they're really great at distressing things. I use them a lot if I have to distress things like tin cans and such, because I can do a lot of thin buildup coats on things. And the other thing that they're also super awesome for is distressing fabrics. So this is a bar towel that by kind of spraying unevenly, I was able to get a really distressed look. But it still is able to be washed and still is able to sort of look like a fabric rather than using like a normal like Home Depot spray paint where it would get really chunky and thick. And also same with this. This is just, I toned out a pillowcase for a show to make it look a little more distressed. One thing when doing this distressing that sometimes people get surprised by is that I always use sort of a variety of colors in my toning. So I'll always use a black, I'll always use a brown, I'll always use shades of green, right? I don't tend to use any white or yellows. So my highlight, you can kind of see here on the bottom, is always sort of like a bright lime or moss green. And that kind of gives me a more realistic look of toning and patina with highlights and shadows and stuff. without being quite so cartoony. I think it's a little more realistic that way. And so there's a whole line of these things. They've got a whole bunch of different colors and things. The one that I find myself using the most often are, they have three technically wood tones, but the two I use most often are called glossy wood tone and walnut wood tone. And they're really great. I'm just going to use the white plastic medallion we made earlier. And it is a spray that allows things to start looking wooden. Now, the one big trick of this is that you're going to want to do thin coats of this. You're not going to want to do heavy sprays because it will sort of blot and run. But you can see in the time that we've been talking, just a couple of sprays, it's already got sort of a real wood patina to it. The other products they use a lot are their metallics. You've already seen some of them. This, for example, is that metallic. But it's also really good for toning out things. So, for example, this is our yellow guy. And you can see, by applying thin, even coats, it gives you a really good metallic finish. And there's a bunch of different versions of it. I'll put a link to the website of all the different colors they have. But it's a really handy product for you guys to know about, because like I say, it works so well for distressing things, and also just kind of to give sort of a finished polish to things, because I'm a big believer that props should never be a single color, because I tend to find that nothing in life is really a single color. The final category of things I want to kind of cover as we end this class are some resources that might be available to you as you're either researching or trying to create props at your schools. First of which, I'll link to a couple of them on the website. They are vintage sales catalogs. I like Sears Roebuck is very famous for having really well illustrated catalogs, and they're very helpful for finding things like, you know, was a toaster available in 1912, or, you know, what did a 1930s telephone really look like? The next book that I use a lot also in my research world is Pantone, The 20th Century in Color. The reason that I really like this book is that it gives you, broken out by decade, sort of suites of color. So let's say you're doing, you know, Bye Bye Birdie or any of the shows that happened in the 50s. This gives you a couple of different palettes for what the world of the show would look like if it was happening in that day. And so it's really helpful also to figure out color combinations to make things make sense, and then to question, you know, what color would a sofa have been in this era, or what color fabric should I be looking for to do pillowcases of, or that kind of stuff. And then the second book that I use a lot for props especially is this book by Dover Pictora called Label Art. Dover Pictora, if you don't know that company, has a bunch of different copyright-free, royalty-free books of images. So they've got different patterns and different stylistic ones. This one is all specifically about labels. And so it's a bunch of vintage labels from all sorts of things, from, you know, fruit crates to, you know, different drinks and tonics and things like that, all the way to, you know, scientific things, poison and different chemicals and such. And the thing that's really great for that is that it allows you, because these are all royalty free, there also is always included a CD, so you can print out these images. So if you're doing a show and you'd have a bunch of cans that are vintage, you can use a modern can like this one, and then just by printing off the labels, you're able to convert things very easily. You don't have to spend a bunch of time photoshopping or hunting or anything like that, but you have vintage props for your show. Thank you so much for coming to class today. I hope that you guys learned some new things and will take that back to your schools as you're creating props around the country. There's a website for this class here on the screen as well. And that again will give you links to all of the different things we've talked about in this class if you want to try these things for yourself at your own schools. I hope you guys have a great time making props and have a great rest of your conference. See you guys later.